We've been kind of doing this a little bit differently just because of, we were talking about your game, but just so you know, our numbers are color-coded, like we were saying, in red, yellow, green, and blue.
Right.
Red and yellow tend to be more slice bias tendencies or fade bias tendencies. Blue and green tend to be more draw bias tendencies. And we're going to see all of them in your swing. We're going to see some red, some yellow, some green, some blues.
Right.
And again, the general gist of it is that you're swinging too far to the right and you're closing the face too many degrees to the to the path,
right,
which is going to cause the ball to hook too much, right? And that's your miss, and we're seeing it up here. Missing it to the left and also hitting behind the golf ball.
Right.
The reason for that, the overall reason of everything that's going on for that is this impact position, where as you're coming into the golf ball, we're seeing that shaft kind of lean away a little bit too much,
right,
with these arms very bent and separated. It's very difficult to control the bottom of the swing or the radius of the swing if I'm doing that with my elbows coming through the bottom, and especially my wrists.
Yeah, can't be consistent.
Yeah, and we know just from watching the best players in the world and their level of consistency, and better players, that when we look at their impact position, they're going to have their arms much closer together, and they're going to have their hands slightly forward as they're striking the golf ball. Right. Almost anybody I pull up will have this look. If they don't look similar to that as they're coming into impact, they're usually going to move their body pretty far toward the target or have a lot of rotation to compensate. So there was that was Koepka. This is John Curran, right?
Right.
You can pull up. I like to use Duffner a lot. Look at Duffner, kind of the same concept, right? Hands are leading the golf ball into impact.
Right.
Now he's gradually losing that angle through the bottom of the swing, but his elbows are definitely much closer coming in. They're not already separated, and that will give him the ability that you're trying to feel in terms of that rotation. So he's got that right elbow kind of tucked in here. He's got this angle maintained, and then what he can do through the bottom of the swing is keep his rotation moving and flex his lead wrist into the golf ball. Right. When you get into that same position, the downswing, your elbows have already started to separate, kind of some of the stuff we were talking about in the backswing, and your wrists have already started to unhinge quite a bit at this point.
Right.
People call that a cast or just a lack of lag, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
This is the precursor to what we're seeing. So let's talk about how we're going to tend to load a lot of weight into your heels here.
Yeah.
Right. That's where you get very far forward in your shoulders, right? It may not look like you're bent too far forward, but just in general versus what we like to see, he's about 6 feet tall,
right,
and we're going to see a little bit less bend and definitely kind of less roll forward in the shoulders. And some of that's just based off of where you have your hands as you're setting up to the golf ball.
Right.
I typically like to see the hands kind of right underneath the shoulder there. So you have your hands more inside of that, so the hands end up getting a little low. That in itself will also kind of pull your elbows apart as you're going to set up the golf ball.
Right.
Versus being able to put the arms a little bit more in front of the chest. Right, so weight into the heels, hands a little close to the body, grip a little weak. Despite those issues that we've discussed, you do a pretty good job starting the club back. It gets a little bit vertical, but again, like I said, you're hitting a draw, so players who are trying to reduce the draw are going to have more of this takeaway. Right. This is more of a Dustin Johnson style takeaway, or even more of a Brooks Koepka where the arm may float away a little bit. But even still, you're still turning pretty well in that position.
Which is, I think, what I was even kind of trying to do.
Yeah.
Like I told you, I think probably my earlier swings were more inside, but I was like, this is what I'm kind of working on, trying to take it more outside.
And I think this is the last one, and this ball hooked. Even though you're trying to prevent it from hooking,
right,
this one hooked quite a bit, actually. Because it all has to do with your lack of control of the face at the bottom.
Right.
And, the face, despite the weak grip, is pretty good there, too. It's not great, but it's not getting overly open. Most of the time when I see a grip as weak as that, we're going to see that club face start to spin open quite a bit.
Gotcha.
So as the club continues back here, you do a pretty good job of turning in the backswing. Most of this is just going to have to do with kind of how you load the club at the top, right? So we get to the top, and this is where your grip kind of finally starts taking over. When that club gets laid off like that, that's just the forearm rotation kind of taking over, basically. From that right hand being on top, you just kind of spin it. You just do it really late. And so that club ends up in this extremely laid off position. Like I said, typically from that spot, the club would then start coming over the top.
Right.
But in your case, you actually combat that by dropping it more to the inside. which also means that it's probably getting a little bit more open relative to your path because it's already really open. And so what you have to do through the bottom is completely stop your body and flip your hands.
Right.
And so even though, like I was saying, this is a pretty good position right here. Your arms are a little bit behind you. It's not that bad. You're going to see the tour player here. He gets a little laid off, right? So you can get away with kind of minor variations of this stuff, but when it gets a little bit too extreme, it gets more difficult to, hold on. It gets a little bit more difficult to compensate for. So he gets a little laid off, and then he's going to shallow it out in the downswing. And you'll see the big difference here. So his shoulders are probably about 60 to 70 degrees closed there. And you're above that number. So you're more in that blue area, and your arms and elbows are more back here. Right? Like I was saying, a position that I try to get a lot of my slicers to achieve when they're coming in here because they're drawing it too much. And this is where we start to see the body completely stop. Right? Even though that number will decrease, right? The body is kind of slowing down already as it's coming in, and your shoulders are actually still closed at impact. Typically speaking, we like to see those shoulders about 30 degrees open or so as you're striking the golf ball, and we're definitely going to see a lot more of your backside as you're hitting the ball there.
Gotcha.
Right, so your position as you come into impact, you're right, you've got to extend a little bit, but all of that's in an effort to try to get that club face somewhat square. If you rotated through like he does, it'd be very difficult from that weak grip. Yeah, you'd probably hit shots. I mean, that would be my guess. We wouldn't know. I mean, you might do something better with your hands.
Well, I can tell you the only time I notice it, I've never noticed it on the course, but when I'm hitting wiffle balls in my backyard, every once in a while, 45 degrees right.
Yeah, so I was going to ask,
what am I doing?
So that's the hosel, if you're doing that. And I was going to ask if you, or dead off the toe, right? Because as much as you're doing this, you're kind of pulling everything back towards you.
Right.
So as the arms bend, you're constantly kind of changing the length of the bottom of the swing and where the club's going to bottom out at. And that's where your inconsistency comes in. All of these are common for players of all abilities until you get to the better abilities. Like until you get to your very low single-digit players and your tour players where they're just very good at controlling the bottom of the swing, right? They could sit on a range for hours and hours on end and not hit behind one golf ball, right? And that's why they're so good at what they do. The interesting part about this, let me pause. Into the finish now, even though you have all this separated and shoulders and not turning.
Right.
As you go through, your arms extend and your spine moves into extension, not fast enough, but moves into a more extended direction. Right. So not bad into the follow through there. Your weight's forward, your arms are extended.
Right.
So you take that bent position and you kind of sling your arms away from your body. But let's try some opposite feels here and see what happens. We're going to try to just get you into a better setup, modify the grip slightly, and then just try to see if we can't really just get you to feel your hands more forward at impact. I'll give you some drills and feels to do that. Really, when you're talking about those punch shots, so I believe this is one that you were trying to do here. Yeah, really teach you how to execute that a little bit better so that as you're striking the ball, you actually have the hands more forward, and you start to get those shoulders more open into the finish as you're going through. Although that was a little bit better there.
Because I was even thinking.
You can see in my grip there too, where both of the creases of the right hand point up at the right shoulder.
Right.
And that's more where we want your grip kind of in this realm here, right? You have a slice prone grip and you're a hooker because you're using your hands too much through the bottom of the swing. So there's that grip position that's closer to where your grip is at, especially with your right hand. And even if we just move it into more neutral, right, where you get a little bit on the weaker side, that would be headed in the correct direction.
Right.
And also noting the time conversation with
The first swing, right, we know the issues that we're having, and we're still getting laid off and everything like that, but we're just trying to get a sense here. So just by standing a little bit further away from the golf ball, getting the arms in front of the chest, now when you swing down, we see those arms back in front of the pivot a little bit more. Right, evident by this gap, right? You don't see it over there, and that right arm is basically really kind of pinched in behind you and stuck. The shoulders have actually started to rotate quite a bit more already too, about 20 degrees more coming in the downswing. When we look at the face on view, right, we'll see that because of that now in that same position, you have your arm structure much better where the elbows are closer together. right? And your left arm a lot straighter. So you have this angle maintained a little bit longer coming through versus what we're seeing there. Then on the way through, in an effort to try to punch it, now again, there's no ball present yet, but now we're seeing more of what we want to see at impact. The shoulders are starting to open up a little bit as you're coming through the bottom of the swing, and you're getting that left wrist a little bit flatter as you're striking the ball, just from changing the grit. Now there's no ball there, so all of this could go completely haywire as we put a golf ball in there.
8 degrees closed and 2 degrees open.
Yeah, about 10 more degrees to turn, and then into the follow through. Now we're getting even more turn and extension as you get into the finish here. Right. So arms aren't rolling over so much, and that's the grip, right? So again, if you do the move when we put a ball in there like you're doing on the left, we're going to see a lot of that forearm rotation, and you're going to hit these balls way to the left, but hopefully then you can kind of teach yourself how to start the ball more onto the right. Let's see a few more practice swings with that same motion there.
Yeah, I guess.
Did the defendant
You watch this swing right here. This is what we're trying to get you to feel. So the fact that you can do it in a practice swing means you can do it. It's just going to take some time to train. So again, when we take a look at this position, right now in the downswing here, those arms are just much more together and back in front of the body. Right, your hands are more forward as you're coming into impact here, versus how they start to separate. Again, that's partially because you stand too close to it, and your arms separate because you kind of move it too far from the inside. But that's night and day difference. So that's exactly what you want to see at impact. And you'll see as you go through, you're not really rotating those forearms over. But as soon as we put the ball in, that's why I said a lot of the stuff that we may do to start with may cause you to hook it more. As soon as that ball is in there, that right hand starts to take over and close that club face. So it's really just going to teach you, the main thing we're going to start to teach you is how to minimize your forearm rotation coming through the ball.
Trying these little punch shots, like as soon as you
take specific steps?
Start doing this,
right.
because the club's coming in more shallow, right? It's not going to be coming in behind it as often. You're going to be catching the golf ball more clean,
Right.
and you can see your elbows just not as separated as the club is, at the ball's leaving the face. So it's a really good start for this. Starting to get the shoulders quite a bit more open there as you're coming into impact too, just from getting that sense of not trying to rotate. And it's just a gradual process of bringing these elbows closer together. As you get into longer and longer swings, it's going to be harder and harder to do. That's just kind of how the process works.
Yeah.
Questions about that?
I mean, that's a good thing to work on. Like I said, I've always kind of liked that half rule, but I've never done it to that extent and never realized that I was getting that open. So now that I know,
It doesn't even really get that open there. It gets at the top. So
Right.
the shallowing of the club that you do is typically an opening move, right? So if I'm here this way with that club laid off and then I drop it more, that face is more open.
right.
And so that,
Well, I think, like you said, my grip was 2 weeks, so that was causing me to rotate, to
a little bit, yeah. And I mean, you're still doing that to an extent in the backswing.
yeah.
And that's why we keep it shorter, because if you just kept going, this club would end up getting over here again. So I was saying the start is just to see, can you get the club not so far from the inside and get the hands a little bit more forward.
Right.
So there it is right there. Your arms aren't back here as much. So that's where we then get into kind of the load sequence at the top of the swing. And then, really teaching you how to create the wrist hinge in the right sequence so that, like in some of these practice swings, there's a really good one in here somewhere. Which one is it? Make sure we save this one. This one. Yeah, here we go. Right, you can see in your practice swing, that's the move right there. Right, so just the fact that you can get into those positions is a really good sign, meaning that we can get you to do this on a more regular basis, getting your hands more forward at impact like that. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to do that. This is a short swing with a shorter feeling swing with no golf ball, and you're kind of hitting on all the key points that we're looking for there. That swing 11, yeah. So
Well, definitely gives me some things to